Good afternoon. This is Chris Torrence over at Optym, and we're here for another episode of Semi-Related, the Optym Podcast. With me today is Todd Haselhorst from HEALE Labs, which Todd and I got to actually meet for the first time, I think, last week out in Chattanooga. You still recovering from that, Todd?
Still am, yeah. It was actually my second conference of the week last week, so I got home on Friday, rested on Saturday, turned around, came back, and here we are.
How'd you enjoy F3? First time at F3?
First time at the F3 conference. Great conference. Met a lot of amazing people. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in the space. A lot of great technology. You see the rise of AI in a lot of different places and ways people are using generative AI to solve a lot of problems within the industry. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, man. I also had a good time. It was my, I think, 6th or 7th conference on the circuit this past season. So
this past season?
Just alone, yeah.
So
I'm a regular on the circuit.
Yeah.
I think I was telling everybody in Chattanooga last week, I'm just like, as fun as it was, I'm so glad that the season is finally in the rear view. So, so I don't.
Well, you're right around the corner from next season.
Yeah, I think the next one will be out in, I think that I'm slotted for is Vegas. I think I'm going to go to Manifest again, which is another fun one. So, cool. Well, again, I also want to give a shout out to the Market Scale team here in downtown Dallas atop the Bank of America 53rd floor. So yes, this is a real backdrop. It's not virtual. So I think that this is definitely one of the coolest views I can imagine in Dallas. So first time here?
First time. Beautiful building, beautiful scenery. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, let's kind of get into you a little bit, man. So give us a little background on yourself, man. Where you from?
Sure.
We'll get into some of the HEALE Labs discussion at some point and go to a little more depth in that. But yeah, tell everybody who you are, man. I just got to meet you really not long ago, so had a blast. I think we got to talk a lot, but it was a conference, so kind of quite a few distractions going on. But let everybody who's tuned in today know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so was born in Hays, Kansas. If you look at the United States and you put your finger right in the middle of the map, that's Hays, Kansas. Yeah. Born there, grew up in Kansas City. The rest of my early adulthood life. Started my first business when I was 12, mowing my neighbors' yards, did some landscaping work and stuff like that on the side. That was really my first taste into entrepreneurship and business. I went around and handed out flyers to the neighbors and solicited enough business to have a little business going, and actually my dad still runs that business to this day.
Oh, wow, okay.
Then when I'm a bigger fella, so when I got to junior high and high school, I got attention from football scholarships from major universities. Ended up getting my first one when I was a sophomore to the University of Kansas. Wanted to stay close to home. When I committed, they were 2-10, and everybody was like, "You're out of your mind. You can go anywhere in the country to play football, but you're going to stay home and go to a place that's 2-10. What are you doing?" And I just had this feeling that they were
pre-portal years, right?
It was a full-blown commitment back then.
Yeah.
Now they can just go and leave whenever they feel like it with no consequences, and they get paid. By the way,
we missed the boat.
I know, right? Yeah. So. Went to the University of Kansas. I had the dream of the NFL.
Sure.
Played my freshman year. Ended up getting hurt my sophomore year.
Yeah.
Hurt my junior year. Injuries just kind of took a toll. I broke my left foot. Tore both posterior labrums. Multiple concussions. Spinal damage. All the things that you get from
classical story from the grid.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, I got my degree in economics and game theory. Graduated in 2008
as a Jayhawk.
Jayhawk, yep. Graduated in 2008. We had the best team in school history. We were 12-1 my last year.
Thank you. Yeah.
Won the Orange Bowl, and that was my first time in Miami. And I kind of fell in love with the city at that point. A lot of fond memories in Miami. But 2008, markets crashed. I had a choice to make. Do I go into finance? Do I go to Wall Street? Do I do government, econ work?
Yeah.
And I went back to my roots. I went back to entrepreneurship. And at the time, a friend was starting a freight brokerage. And that's how I got into freight and logistics.
Oh, no. This was prior Miami. Okay.
This was prior. So did the whole Orange Bowl thing. At the time I was living in Lawrence, Kansas.
Okay.
Moved back to Kansas City. And then and got into freight brokerage, truckload. Moved into household goods.
Okay.
Built an auto transport platform, building connecting shippers with carriers in auto transport. We eventually sold that. I actually moved out to Phoenix for that one. We were based out of Phoenix, so I spent 4 years in Phoenix. Sold that to a publicly traded company, and then left that and helped Lyft and Uber get their markets set up in Phoenix.
Cool.
Fun story, I was cited for operating an illegal taxi service. Back when Lyft and Uber were not legal.
Statute of limitations is passed for you.
Yeah, so when you look up on my background, it's hilarious. When you look at my background check, the only thing I have on it is Department of Weights and Measures.
I think we talked about that last week.
Yeah. So that was cool. I got to see really disruptive technology, Lyft and Uber, how they were deploying within markets in a gray area in a space that was not well defined. And then also saw how they got ride sharing passed in the state of Arizona and used my case to help that process.
Well, as a former Uber employee myself, more on the freight side, but and then I think the Super Pump series is now on Netflix. So it's fun
I
watching
heard about
back
that.
around and just kind of try to picture where like the freight portion of it. It's like he was like, oh, it's not until like at the 7th episode.
Yeah, when does freight come into the mix?
Yeah, but it's still nevertheless having been a part of that and hear your story. It's like talk about disruption and I still to this day take Ubers all the time. Why didn't I think of this? So,
yeah, all the time.
Well, cool. Well, Todd, kind of like fast forward, great, like cool background.
Thank
so
you.
we're at Uber, and at some point, when does the genesis of like HEALE Labs start, or is there a couple more pieces in between that kind of led up to that?
So after the whole Uber thing, I had a software development company. I was building software and building products for people, and I realized during that time that the amount of work that it takes to build a product, I might as well do all the other things.
Sure.
Because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so my old business partner came back around and he said, hey, I've got this idea for an IoT-based smart container to ship high-value, mission-critical household goods freight.
Okay. And IoT, for those that may not know,
Internet of Things is a device you put inside of something that gives you its location.
Sensors.
All the sensors and stuff like that. So we built that out. That was called CubeMonk. Eventually sold that to a group called Send.
Okay.
And I, because of my background in economics and game theory and also product development and technology, I was very fascinated by what was happening within Web3 and what was happening with what is the next iteration of the internet. And so I always kind of had my pulse on that. And back in the early days, the technology wasn't really scalable. It was too slow, it was too expensive, it wasn't ready for prime time. So I kind of waited for a while, and it wasn't until recently when the technology became low cost, scalable, fast enough to run enterprise applications on top of, also secure enough and private enough to do public technology in a way where the data is secure. And so that's when all that stuff happened, technology matured, and then I decided to move forward with HEALE Labs and launch HEALE.
Very cool. And then so kind of a timeline, HEALE Labs, I think you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Kind of a
year and a half ago.
And now tell us about give us a little bit, where are you guys based now? Give us a little bit of the company stats that you guys have.
So we're based in Miami currently. We're currently building out our integrations with different partners. The technology, actually the protocol itself, isn't launching until July of 24.
Okay.
That's when we're going live with the token, with the whole network. That's when we're kicking everything off.
So we talked a lot about IoT. We got that one figured out.
Yes.
We talked about the sensor, and we talked about how sensors tie into IoT. We talked about Web3. Now we're getting into tokenization.
Yeah.
So we're talking about really cool topics that I personally have an interest in and have been for many years.
Yep.
But I'm going to assume that everybody tuning in probably is going to need a little bit more, I'll say, remedial tutorials of sorts to kind of get up to speed. Can you take some of that and kind of simplify it for folks that say, hey, I know the term, but I've never really heard it kind of defined in a way that the layman can understand it. And I think I may fall in that category in a lot of things.
Sure. Yeah, so basically what a token is it's a reference ID. It's a unique identifier, similar to, I don't think they can see, but there's license plates on the wall here.
Yeah.
A license plate is a unique identifier that says this tag is associated with this car.
Okay.
And then the state of Texas can come in and they can look at that and run that plate and say RRT 5831, this driver's license belongs to this car.
Sure.
And if at any point it doesn't belong to that car, then you got problems with the police, right? So it's able, because of the driver's license system, the state and the federal government is able to identify who owns what cars and all the registration and everything that goes along with it.
Makes sense, yeah.
And that's a very paper-driven manual process. If you even talk about car titling.
DMV's,
yeah. So now if you apply that same concept to something within logistics, let's say it's an item, a box, a carton, a pallet, a truck, a trailer, a container, a warehouse, that token, that unique identifier represents that thing digitally within a broader network.
Sure.
And so when you want to find that space in that truck across the whole network, you can reference that unique identifier for that specific space in that truck. Same is true for an item or a box or a pallet.
Right.
And these are unique identifiers, so they can't be replicated, they can't be duplicated, and so it eliminates the ability for people to fraudulently create these things.
Sure.
Just like a license plate. If that license plate doesn't belong to that car,
there's a discrepancy.
You got a discrepancy in the, and the police get involved.
Well, so kind of bringing that into more of like a use case, and again, most of this audience will probably be, in the trucking, logistics, trans space.
Yep.
I think I get it, having worked in visibility and understand a lot of these concepts, but when you think about the use cases for this audience, can you kind of pinpoint a couple, maybe the way things currently are done, and where you see this type of technology kind of, disrupting is the word that always comes to mind. But I think it's in the right direction, right? I think it's going to actually be absolutely, going to be way eons ahead of probably the way things get done today.
Yep.
But can you kind of break that down into a more tangible use case again?
Sure. So let's just take truckload as an example.
Sure. Perfect.
So I'm a carrier. I may have a handful of load boards that I work with. I may have a handful of brokers that I work with. I go and I say, hey, I have this truck that's available going from Dallas to Los Angeles between these dates and these times, and this is what I can carry.
Okay.
So when that carrier posts that capacity on a load board, on the other side you have brokers and shippers that are calling on that capacity.
Correct.
Trying to match those two together. Well, if I as a carrier got somebody to take that to buy it from me, that's still on all these other load boards.
Yeah.
And so how many times are brokers sitting there or shippers sitting there calling on capacity that's long gone?
Right.
So by tokenizing it, as soon as you remove it from one, you can remove it from all, because that unique identifier has now left and it's now in the hands of somebody else. And so that's one example.
I think that's going to resonate. Having been a broker many years ago for myself, before I got in the tech world, that was always a big concern. And I almost looked at it from not just the capacity availability, but the load itself, right?
The load
one
itself.
Physical shipment.
That's the other thing.
Posted 100 times.
Yeah.
And everyone's assuming it's like a phantom load at some point.
Right.
And then you have these situations, as you've seen, right? Either side of the coin, where someone takes that load assuming it's still a physical shipment.
Yep.
And it's actually been covered, and now you got a problem. So you have the data integrity on these boards.
Exactly.
So I can definitely see use cases within load boards in particular to kind of prevent some of these mishaps from occurring. That's very cool.
Another one is when a truck pulls up to a dock, there's a lot of theft that's been happening recently.
Fraud, theft, all these things. Yeah.
They'll go out with a truck and they'll act like they're a specific company.
Right.
They'll come in, they'll pull their trucks in. It looks and feels a lot like that company. They'll load it up, they'll drive off. Well, if you're tokenizing that driver's identity,
right,
that tractor's identity, that trailer's identity,
as a one of one, right?
As a one of one, this is one of one. You can validate, did the right truck and did the right driver and the right tractor and the right trailer pull up to the right dock to pick up the right shipment at the right date, at the right time. You can validate that those things actually happened.
Yes.
And that's where, I don't know if we want to get too far into this, but that's where zero knowledge proof comes in, where you can provide a cryptographic proof that actually happened.
Yeah. Within
the real world. And the way that you do that is you take all those unique identifiers and you can cross-reference them against each other to say, did this actually happen? Did the right driver and the right truck and the right trailer pull up to the right dock at the right date and the right time to pick up the right shipment with the right documentation? Aggregate that out across the board.
Right.
That's where the value comes in.
And is this going to be executed through a platform? Is that, when I think HEALE Labs, what am I purchasing? Is it a true SaaS type platform?
Yeah.
Recurring revenue type model? How do you envision this in due time? Mm-hmm. Kind of that go-to-market strategy. Is it a true software, pure play in terms of software?
So it's an open source network.
Okay.
And the whole internet itself is built off of open source protocols and open source networks. So when you go send an email, it uses an SMTP protocol or an IMAP protocol. And that's a fancy term for just saying, here's how this works.
Yeah. If you care to know.
Yeah, so that when you click send, it goes from your email server to somebody else's email server.
Right.
And the protocol is what dictates the movement of that thing.
That's right. Yeah.
And so really what we've created is a protocol that allows for tokenization to happen, to create those unique identifiers that the systems and tools that people are already using can plug into, similar to if you're using Gmail or Microsoft Exchange for your emails. Mm-hmm. Same concept, right? You're using those applications, and then behind that is a protocol that's managing everything. And so HEALE Network is a protocol that anybody can plug into. It's open source. They can connect into it. All of their technology, whether it's a TMS, an ELD, an ERP, whatever the tool is, to accomplish the same thing, to create those unique identifiers.
Got it.
And then when they need to share the data around those unique identifiers, they can share that data seamlessly. They don't have to go out and cobble together all these EDI and API, all these different connections and endpoints. They have one place that they can connect to, which is the single source of truth that they can reference to say, what happened in this shipment? So when you run into an exception, right? Everybody wants to know who's
finger pointing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's to blame?
Whose throat do I choke here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where did this? You need to identify what happened, where things went wrong. You need to identify the exceptions. You need to identify all those different things. That's where all the risk is at.
Sure.
There's not a lot of risk when things go right. It's
right.
Nobody calls you, hey, that was the best shipment ever.
That's the way the world works, right?
Yeah, they call you and they're like, hey, so something happened, and you need to be able to identify what happened. So that's where the open source protocol comes in. It connects into the different technologies that the industry already uses to provide that tokenization and that validation and those zero knowledge proofs.
Very cool. I think a lot of people tuning in are going, they're starting to get it and see the opportunity at play here. How do you monetize this as an organization? And who are initially when you're going to market, who are your target audience, consumer, users, et cetera?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I think it's good that I explain a little bit how the internet works.
Please. Yeah.
So the whole internet is built on open source protocols. Mm-hmm. When you go into your browser, you'll see HTTP. Yep. That's a protocol. Traditionally, everything was open source until right around the mid-90s to the 2000s and even into the 2010s, when those open source protocols became monetized by companies building applications on top of them.
There you go, yeah.
So Microsoft, Apple, all these major companies, even Google itself, are built on top of these open source protocols. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the internet runs on Linux. Linux is an open source community. Nobody makes money off of it. They just do it out of the kindness of their heart. What happened in 2008 was these open source protocols could then become monetized through tokens. And so that's where you see the largest, the fastest growing asset class in world history, in the history of the world, are these open source protocols. And you probably heard of Ethereum. That's one of the open source protocols.
Bitcoin, Ethereum, yeah.
Those are all just open source protocols that are monetized through tokens.
Right.
And so that token represents monetization for that particular protocol. And when you use that, you leverage the functions of the protocol by using that token.
Got it.
And so that's how these things are monetized, and to a large extent, it's similar to currency itself. It's similar to the dollar, for instance. When people say, well, why does this stuff have value? You have to go back to why does the dollar have value?
Intrinsic, yeah, I don't know. Or
yeah,
does it
it's because we all believe it has value.
Right.
It's a function of supply and demand.
Right.
So as we've seen in recent years, when the supply of dollars went up,
You're an econ major, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. Our ability to purchase things went down. All the items in the store went up in price because the market was adjusting for the new supply of money that came into the market. So then the Federal Reserve comes in and they raise interest rates. They pull money back out of the market. They bring the supply back because the prices were out of control. And so that's the same way that these things function. But the main difference is that you have demand and you have supply. So the US dollar gets value because of the demand for the dollar. The world, when they want to do transactions in oil and contracts for oil or minerals or a lot of different things, they need dollars to do that. So that creates demand for the dollar. So the supply of the dollar is you can print as much as you possibly want.
Worries me.
Yeah, I wish I could. It'd be nice. But the demand, that's what dictates the value of these things.
Sure.
Currencies in general, whether it's the renminbi, the yuan, the whatever it is.
Sure.
That's what creates the value of that currency.
So when you talk, it's rare I get somebody that can just articulate and kind of educate me, because I feel like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then I get someone who's got in game theory,
econ and game theory,
tie it into like the trucking industries. Like, so I'm still trying to gravitate towards like, when you think about like, this seems like just all encompassing in so many ways. So it seems like, again, opportunity is massive.
It is.
But when you think about HEALE Labs, kind of how are you going to incrementally, do you envision kind of bringing this to market? And like I said earlier, who are you, like, okay, great, HEALE Labs, we think we have a conceptual understanding of this. Yep. Now what? How does this go from a theory or the endless applications to a tangible solution that people go, I think I can get on with this. I want to get on this train. How do you envision doing that within the domain that we play in?
Sure. So within any technology, there's an adoption curve, and always. In the beginning, there's the innovators, and that's the 2.5% of the people. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that recognized early what Google was, what Amazon was, what Facebook was, Microsoft, Apple. They early on recognized, oh wow, I may not know what's going on here, but I believe that this is where the future is headed, and they want to hitch their wagon to it. So we've been focusing on identifying who those innovators are so that we can partner with those people to bring this technology. And for us, we're connecting with the TMSs. We want to bring we want to connect with the TMSs to bring this technology to them, to help them simplify, to really for them clean up their data, make it easier for them to ingest data, free up their roadmap so they don't have to manage all those integrations that they're currently doing, provide them with additional streams of revenue, and provide them with a unique competitive advantage where they can then go out to their end users and customers and say, hey guys, use my technology and you will get the benefits of this network and you will make more money, reduce the amount of time involved in these transactions, and eliminate a lot of risk involved in it. And so we're partnering with those TMSs that they're already working with the shippers, the brokers, and the carriers. We're integrating that technology into them so that their end users can get the benefits of that network.
And you make up a good point there. I think we can all agree that one of the core fundamental issues in this industry as I've been playing is the data, right? So
yeah,
again,
it's a major
problem.
How
accurate is it? How can you access it? There's so many moving parts, so many trading partners.
Yep.
It truly is an ecosystem.
It is.
So I think there's merit probably to saying, can we, this is an ongoing question, is there a standardization or governance layer that would make this a little bit more of a seamless process? And I'll use that term loosely. But do you envision in due time, and you mentioned again, the early adopters, the very forward-thinking innovator types, and I agree with you.
Yep.
But we're also in an industry that traditionally hasn't really been on the cutting edge of much.
Right.
For better or worse, right?
Right?
We've seen technologies come and go, see a lot of incumbent traditionalist type mentalities that are like, yeah, we've heard this before, right?
Yeah.
And I'm often, even as a fellow, tech vendor, I have to be a little bit, I've got to be willing to kind of self-deprecate myself in some of the technology that's been promised that hasn't come to fruition yet, right? So Todd, again, I think I see it.
Yeah.
But I'm just, what are you hearing initially in the industry? From those folks that you're evangelizing this technology to? Is it kind of few receptions, probably haven't even understand it's probably that's got to be a hurdle in its own right, but what kind of feedback are you getting? What kind of challenges do you counter now, or do you envision as this maybe starts to proliferate? Or do you think everyone's just going to be like, this has always made sense, we just never had no one's ever actually tried to follow through with it?
HEALE, first and foremost, is an education company. We have to be able to educate the end users and the technology providers on how this technology is going to reduce costs for them, eliminate risk, and minimize the amount of time that they're interfacing with transactions, ultimately so that they can make more money and be more profitable, right? Because that's what business is all about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of education, but when you look at the problems around data and how that shows up in a logistics shipment or transaction, you have multiple parties that are involved. So let's just use an example. Coca-Cola is shipping a truckload of syrup or whatever. They may have multiple parties that are involved with that. They're originating the data here. So the quality of that data is subjective to how well they do at validating the data before it goes in. So to give you an easy example of what that looks like, the difference is manually putting in an address versus doing a Google lookup.
Sure.
When you go to Google lookup, everybody's using that same standard data format so that they can say, oh, that's the address that I'm talking about.
Right.
If you don't have that form field, if you don't do that validation up front.
Been there.
Yeah, exactly. And so really what it comes down to, if you think about it, is you have to identify the different parties and their data, the formats in which they have their data. In the middle, you have a layer that normalizes that data so that Coca-Cola and FedEx don't have to change their data standards. They don't have to change all their data standards internally. They can connect to that normalization layer. Mm-hmm. They can connect to that layer that also cleans the data and standardizes, cleans, normalizes, so that when they're interacting with each other, they reference that unique ID. They say, oh, Coca-Cola, were you talking about this shipment? Were you talking about this piece of data? Were you talking about this invoice? Were you talking about...
Right.
And so that layer, that middle layer piece, everybody, I think, knows that there needs to be some sort of standardization around data.
Yeah.
And there does need to be. The challenge is getting everybody to play along And the cost associated with that is very high because all these different shippers, brokers, and carriers now need to go into their database and they need to change all their data standards.
Cleanse it, yeah.
And then they got to go back and they got to train all their employees on what this new data is and how to interact. So from a process perspective, from a data perspective, it's a complete nightmare. And so what HEALE is that protocol, it standardizes the data exchange between the different parties. It settles the data, any data disputes that there may be between those parties. It uses AI to clean that data to make sure that over here somebody may have put in Kansas with 2 N's.
Happens, yeah.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
When it comes to the network layer, the network says, nope, sorry, this is Kansas, spelled like this. So it standardizes that data format in the middle, that normalization layer, and cleaning it is really the key. So that whoever else touches that shipment or that document or that data can access that same set of data by using that unique identifier and saying, hey, this shipment, let me get access to the data associated with this shipment, instead of them all having different sets of data and updating all those different sets of data so that Coca-Cola can manage their shipment life cycle. They're all accessing the same set of data and just making changes to it, and then the network is identifying who's making changes to it, managing who has permissions and access to make those changes, and making sure that everything is secured with encryption end to end so that hackers can't get in the middle of that, which we've seen a lot of recently.
Big topic, yeah.
So they can't get in the middle of that to exploit any of the parties that are involved in that transaction.
So it's that distributed ledger mentality, immutable, that I look back, working at a shipper, I know it goes back, this is just where it hits home for me, is kind of talking about our load board example. It's just the way it's like spring cleaning. No one wants to do it.
Everyone
knows it needs to happen. But we would do these exercises where we would do an RFP event and we would just do a purge of all the data, and you'd have warehouses and facilities, and to your point,
data lakes.
Fat finger, yes, but it would be abbreviations, all caps, misspellings.
Yep.
So you'd have one physical location that when you in a data format would be showing 37 times, even though it was only one physical address.
Right.
And so I think that, again, everyone should be bought into this.
Yeah.
But it goes back to there's a lift that has to happen. There's a mindset shift. There's got to be a willingness to do this and take the time to do it right.
Yep.
That's where I feel like, just as fundamentally in this industry, because it's transportation, it's always moving, just business, right?
Yeah.
How are we going to get there? How are we going to get people to realize, like, hey, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of work, but once we have that standardization and some level of governance, and I think you mentioned trust. I think this is a zero trust, which, again, another fancy term there, but I think everybody gets it.
Yeah.
But we still have to, everyone can come to the table and say, we agree with this.
Yeah.
But then it gets back to, there's going to be some spring cleaning that has to happen. And I think that's where a lot of these things tend to fall short. And then on top of that, someone's asking if there's, when you talk about the federal government being, a regulatory component of governance in general, how is it the private sector or a tech player can come in and try to, is there that optic or that perception that the amount of data that you would have access to, is that going to be a turnoff where there's, again, this total lack of trust? I think that's another industry problem, right? No one really trusts anybody.
That's why the single source of truth has been created, because I don't want to give you my data.
Right. So
I don't want to lose control and ownership of my data.
Yeah.
Well, that's the power of decentralized. That's the power of these protocols. Is they're decentralized, meaning that you control and you own your data.
Right.
So you don't lose control. You don't lose ownership. You maintain control and ownership of your data. It's just that when you connect with another system and when you send that data across to that other system, the middle layer basically translates it so that it connects over here and ingests that data into their system appropriately as well. So I think everybody knows that there's data standards that need to happen. The cost of changing them, it's a cost-benefit analysis, right?
Sure.
What is the cost versus the benefit? And without going into too much detail, you have to flip the equation on its head to make the benefits far out exceed the cost. And so that's what the HEALE network does through tokenization and through our incentives in our reward system that actually incentivizes and rewards people for doing that. So what it's going to take for this to happen is that people, the innovators that get in early and they see how they can leverage the technology to make more money, they're going to be the ones, just like all technology with early adopters, they're going to be the ones that are paving the path forward that everybody else is going to have to follow, that everybody else is going to follow along with. So those innovators are the ones who stand to gain the most, and they're the ones that will take up a lion's share of the future market, just like in any technology.
Yeah,
first mover advantage is a huge thing in any market. Well, the way that you change the equation is this is game theory.
There you go. Your education.
Just throw that reference in. It's how do you make the benefits of doing a desirable outcome, which is data standards, how do you make the benefits far outweigh the costs?
Sure.
And so the way that we take that approach is we say, look, we will simplify the standardization by providing you with this normalization layer to connect you with the broader network. We'll help you with that connection. We'll get you connected and onboarded. And then we'll also, through our rewards and incentives, we'll reward you and incentivize you with the tokens for being a part of this network and for being an early adopter and doing transactions and shipments through the network.
Got it.
And so that creates the flywheel effect that now this 2.5% over here, their businesses are growing, they're making a lot more money, it becomes the buzz of the industry. And then now the early adopters, once the innovators have gotten in and they're like, whoa, we're making a lot more money. Now the early adopters see that, and the early adopters are like, okay, well, I'm an early adopter. I like technology, but I don't want to be the first ones. I don't want to be
common. Yeah.
Yeah.
The risk.
Let's just let somebody else be the first one through. They'll take note and they'll see what's happening over here with the innovators, and because everybody's following the innovators anyway, normally, and they'll then see that and they'll then come on board, and then you have the early majority, and the same thing will happen. The early majority will look at the early adopters and the innovators and say, wow, these guys are making a lot more money than we are. They're taking jobs from us. They're taking loads from us because they're providing a better service for lower cost, with less hassle for the end user, and they're doing it for a fraction of the price, and they're able to provide a better experience.
Do you see, Todd, that there's those third-party intermediaries that we all work with in any space, right, in the industry, I think, financial institutions, and even in our world, right, there's still third-party integrators. Do you see them kind of being the resistance to this because their entire business model is based on the chaos and just lengthy, long, drawn-out integrations? That's how they make money, right? So I guess that's something that you're hopefully that innovator mentality is like, but does it make sense?
Yeah.
And there's a huge cost to that and time.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I'm with you 100%. But I think throughout history we've seen anytime there's disruption, there's winners and there's somebody that has something to lose.
Yeah.
And just how loud are they and what is their rebuttal argument for this?
Yeah.
I don't think there is a good rebuttal. It's we don't pay you to just drag these implementations out. It's like, okay.
Let's just give you new tools because it's co-opetition. It's not about competition. We're not here to compete. We're here to cooperate and build together. And if you look at that approach, if you see what's happening on Wall Street and what they're doing with this technology, they technically stand to lose by
unless they adopt and get ahead
unless they're the ones adopting it.
Right.
And now what are they doing?
It's that duality and double-edged sword.
Now what are they doing? They're the ones adopting it. They're the ones on Wall Street talking about tokenization of real-world assets being a $12 trillion industry. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, early on they were afraid of it. They were like, oh no, no, no. But then the smart ones were like, wait, we can just use these tools instead of these tools, and we can make even more money.
Yeah.
And so the same concept is true. There will be people that misunderstand what it is,
right,
or they don't know it, and a lot of people are afraid of what they don't know, and so they're reluctant to do, and it depends on the amount of fear that you have. Innovators are fairly, I would say, if you look at the fear spectrum,
yeah.
Innovators are fearless in a lot of contexts, and then
they just think objectively, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of there's and I'll go back as Optym, right? We're kind of an AI vendor.
Yeah.
And we struggle sometime with there's a perception of AI, right?
Yeah. It's going to take away. It's
right.
You're never going to. I've heard this one. You're never going to get rid of the relationship between a broker and a shipper. And I'm like, well, no. Why would you?
Right.
You want the person in the seat to have as many relationships as possible and make it easy for that person.
If only there were enough time, because we leverage machines
to
do
exactly.
the work we don't want to do anyway.
You leverage the machines to do the work that you don't want to do so that you can build relationships with people.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly my answer. Is just there's so many things humans are great at, that, whether it's through protocols, whether it's through advanced AI.
Yeah, why would you waste their time?
It is. It's a waste. It's the calculator again. I said it all at F3. I go, how do you explain AI? It's a calculator. I mean, and that's a really oversimplified way to use it. But again, as I said, and I told everybody, I'm like, you use it. It's just because it makes sense to use.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean, like I said, I always say that the inverse is I'm still frustrated with a lot of these early stage chatbots that clearly they can't understand what I'm trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I want to talk to Todd.
Yep.
And get that human to go.
And that's the worst
right?
experience ever is when you're caught up in a customer service nightmare of, you're caught in a loop of AI where you're like, and I think everybody's had that experience to a large degree. I know you're like, let me talk to a human, please.
Yeah. Starts out with please, and then by the 8th time, it's like...
Yeah, and 0 doesn't work anymore. I used to, But that's really what it is. You want to you want to automate as much as you can. You want the exceptions to come to the surface so that you can properly handle those exceptions. But it's not going to replace in its entirety. It's not going to replace humans, because there's so much nuance and subtlety in the world. And
this industry is absolutely no exception.
Yeah, there's more exceptions, I think, in this industry than any other industry.
But that's just that further accentuates the point. Whether it's an AI vendor or just this open source protocol mentality, it's like a lot of it's numbers and mathematical modeling, et cetera. It is numbers, and again, calculator again.
It's
we're
a
never going to
giant
be
calculator.
better. But that's okay. Like again, there's tasks I always tell people, tech's made us all redundant throughout history, whether we know it or not.
Right.
And again, the fear is natural.
Yep.
But we've always found ways to repurpose, redeploy talent in ways that I think machines are still quite a ways out from being able to do that.
Absolutely.
This human-to-human interaction, as I always say.
You can't replace a human-human interaction.
This you cannot replace.
No,
right?
no.
This can't.
And you can only make it easier for us to have this connection by making the logistics of us getting here and doing this easier, faster, and more streamlined.
Yeah. And when I think about Optym and HEALE, and I know we're kind of in some good discussions.
Yeah.
And it's great to have people that are kind of thinking along the same lines. I think that always makes partnerships work out much better when we see a future vision of what's possible.
Yep.
And try to strive towards that. So I think, if I'm really simplifying again, if HEALE Labs is over here standardizing data, and I'm going to use that data through AI and say, again, let it all just kind of, whether it's transactional, there's so many that happen.
Yep.
And then these exceptions, right, that happen. And again, you look at these operators and you go, well, they spend, 80% of it's pretty, we spend time doing data entry, et cetera.
Yeah.
But let's just take that out of
the equation.
And that 20% of time that you, those exceptions that you spend, you spend 100% of your time on those 20%.
Yes.
That's good. That's where
that's what you want to get to.
But you ask an operator and they're overwhelmed and burdened with so many other tasks that again, if the data were standardized,
right,
and you had an automation component to do that, I mean, that kind of answers the question.
It does, yeah.
So again,
it's bringing those exceptions to the surface so that everything's not an exception.
Right. And we're dealing with the physical world, right?
Yeah.
I think that's another fallacy. People, could ever be 100% automated. I'm like, not in my lifetime at least. I don't ever see things that happen in the physical world.
It's too complex.
It's just so much randomness.
Yeah, so much randomness.
There's no way to ever. I don't see machines ever getting that good that they can predict.
We can't even predict all
here breaking down or an accident or anything. Like it's.
Yeah.
It's just not. That's just the way the world works.
Right? It is. We can't even predict it.
Right.
And we're
living it.
Yeah.
We're here with 4D. We're like we can't.
We're far from being able to. I mean, we're creating AI to help us with that, basically, because we can't even do it very well.
Right. Well, what excites you like the most? Kind of more of a general question here, and it probably ties into the excitement we just probably felt from, because I think there's something just that, in me at least, that when you see what's possible, there's frustration because you see all the hurdles and the barriers and the naysayers, but I do believe in the end that a good tech stack and good ideas will be adopted because it's for the greater good of whether it's the consumer, the business, et cetera, right?
Yep.
I do believe that'll win, but when you think kind of like more of like what do you see in maybe a timeline association if we are able to have more of these open source protocols, some AI? How long do you think do you see any kind of, I dare say the mass adoption, but when do you see some real material adoption? And maybe we'll just tie it back down to this industry. Do you think a couple of years you mentioned the education component alone takes time. I agree with that. But what does that look like, and how long do you think it takes us to get there?
Well, if you look at the growth of the internet itself, and we did this. I actually have a slide. I can show it to you some other time. But when you lay over the top, when you lay over the growth of the internet versus the growth of Web3, right now we're basically in 2000. If that gives you any indication. So, what happened after 2000? Amazon, Google, Facebook, all came out of that .com bust, right? Everybody looked at the .com thing and they're like, pets.com, what doesn't make any sense? And it didn't make any sense. And you look at what happened in Web3 and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't. Outside of that industry, it made no sense whatsoever. So I think there's an important distinction to make, which is that AI needs data integrity.
Yes.
Data integrity and data provenance comes from distributed ledger technology.
Sure.
Comes from Web3 technology. So they need each other in order to properly function. And what I have deemed this period of 2020 to 2030 as, in logistics in particular, is the era of tokenization and artificial intelligence. So I think this conversation 7 years from now will be a totally different conversation that we're having because of the speed at which technology is accelerating.
And it's rapid. I mean, it's
rapid.
Relative to the beginning of, like, historically speaking, it's just we're in these hyper growth type stages. That's
I mean, we're
cool.
Arguably the freight tech revolution started, what would you say?
I would say as soon as the venture capital market started carrying, you know, and I think COVID helped just kind of, that was the first time I can recall. And there's been other, whether it's been economical issues, et cetera, but I think with COVID and people understanding that, the imperative nature of supply chain and transportation being the backbone of global commerce. And the toilet, I always go, it had to be toilet paper, right?
It had to be toilet paper.
But that really did, I always say, the first time at Thanksgiving dinner that year, I didn't have to explain what I do for a living because people understood. They took it for granted.
No toilet paper on the shelves. I understand what you do now.
Right? But we're in a thankless job because it's like the air we breathe. We just assume it's going to be there until it's not.
Where does the milk come from? The grocery store.
Right. Exactly. So, well, cool. Well, Todd, I think we've been talking for a minute, man. So this has been very informative, man. I think we got to talk, like I said, a little bit last week, various times, but I think this is obviously a better environment for me to have a little bit more focused time and understanding. I still, full transparency, have a ways. There's things I still am trying to wrap my head around that I suspect a lot of people tuning in will probably be like, I'm getting a little bit more aware of this. But I think as this proliferation, and maybe it's the finance markets that get ahead of it. Everybody, it's at the end of the day, we're all capitalists.
Let me just leave you with this. When you look at the banking industry as an example, the banking industry created an open API infrastructure. open banking is what they called it. What happened then is the fintech revolution happened.
Yeah.
All we're doing is doing the same thing, but for logistics. We're bringing in an open standard, open architecture for the logistics industry to kick off that logistics technology revolution.
I couldn't agree more. Again, as a fellow, and I'm not a technologist per se, but I am forward thinking. I try to be. I think that as we talk about the people component.
Yep.
I think as you start to see younger generations, they understand these concepts fundamentally. It's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
And I think you'll start to see those folks ascend into management positions, and probably the adoption rate starts to pick up. And I think you could argue that with any technology at any period in time.
Yep.
But I think because of there's so much of a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding, however you want to quantify that. I do think it's great to see the next generation come up and almost saying, well, that makes sense, right? So
it's not an if but when.
It's a win, right?
Yep.
But I think that's a tough. How do you convince? We have to meet people where they are now.
Yeah.
And I think our industry, and I can't speak for others perhaps, but we are, I won't say laggards, but there's definitely a lot of areas of opportunity to kind of evolve.
The cost of change is very high.
And that's in the change management, right? That's
because you're dealing with the real world, the cost of change is very high.
Exactly.
So that's why it's from a technology perspective harder. It's more of a laggard industry because it's interfacing with the real world.
That's right. And that's a great way to put it too, because I think that further just kind of proves of just how challenging this space is, because we're not dealing with a ticker on Wall Street that's buy sell threshold. It's like there's the physical world.
Yeah.
It's so hard. But,
that's why with Uber, the car moving people is a lot easier than moving freight, and so it's just a whole different ball game.
Well said. Well, Todd, hey, thanks again for I know you're heading back to Miami soon, and but appreciate you swinging by, man. And again, thanks to Market Scale and everyone that tuned in for another episode of Semi-Related from Optym. But we'll be on the lookout for future episodes and more cool guests like Todd.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for
having
me.
Thanks again, man.
Yeah,
pleasure.